let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of the
What up, what up? This is your boy Rob Clark welcoming you to the 22 November Network. Get ready for another exciting edition of the Lone Gunman Podcast featuring me, that's right, your boy Rob Clark, coming at you. Stay tuned. Be right there. Hello, and welcome to the show. This is your boy Rob Clark, welcoming you to the Lone Gunman Podcast, episode number 36. Oswald, Indications of Intelligence is what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do, I just want to say that, like the Iron Sheik used to say, I will make you humble. Well, I'm humbled. I don't think a fourth of my audience listened to my last show, after my last show, quote, and hopefully we'll get this thing up and running again and get back to where we were a couple weeks ago. And I don't blame you for not listening. I did you kind of suddenly dirty. But I promise it won't happen again. So let's get right into it. A couple months ago, well, it started last year. Right around the 50th anniversary, we got a written statement, a note from Antonio Veciana to Marie Fonzi, Gaten Fonzi's widow, stating that, in fact, yes, David Atlee Phillips was indeed Maurice Bishop. Now, this wasn't exactly a new revelation to the JFK research community, because we all suspected it, because Gaten Fonzi in his last investigation pretty much proved it, to my satisfaction and many others' satisfaction. But we finally have it straight from the horse's mouth. He wrote it last year. He was at a conference this year and spoke about it. And, actually said it in his own words. And so now we have that, and now we have to figure out, what are the implications? What does it mean exactly? If we have David Atlee Phillips talking to Oswald, at the end of August in Dallas, okay? Because I had always thought that Oswald was in New Orleans until he went to Mexico. in late September. But Veciana says that he saw Bishop, which is, Phillips, meeting with Oswald in Dallas in late August. Now, we of course know that Oswald wasn't working at this time, a real job. He was, as we say, in between jobs. And this moment in Oswald's life is a little bit of a vacuum. We don't know a whole lot about what he was doing after his arrest in New Orleans and from the time he left to go to Mexico in late September. So apparently he made a trip to Dallas sometime in late August to meet with Phillips. And we know that Phillips was Texas born. I believe he was born in Fort Worth. Grew up in Fort Worth. We know Lee spent some time growing up in Fort Worth as well. So how far back does this connection really go? And if so, how did it go back that far? We know Phillips was a Mexico station chief for the CIA in Mexico City. We know Oswald supposedly went to Mexico City in late September. Now, for those out there who say, Oswald was just a framed lone patsy, that he really had no idea what was going on and he was an innocent man, Veciana's revelations pretty much blow that right out of the water if he's talking to Phillips and if he's going to Mexico. And I was listening to Walt Brown on Black Op Radio this past week. And if you haven't yet, I would encourage you to do so as well. There's a lot of good stuff in there, a lot of good observations from Dr. Brown, about what Oswald was doing. It's the Texas School Book Depository that day. He posits that Alec Heidel was supposed to be this pro-Castro Cuban persona, pro-Cuban persona. And this persona had ordered a rifle, and that rifle was subsequently found in the School Book Depository. Now, Dr. Brown believes that it was planted in there by Oswald under the pretense that, possibly it was made to appear that this Alec Heidel character, this fictional character, was taking shots at Kennedy, and that Kennedy would have been, of course, the shots would have missed, and that Kennedy would have been whisked away to LBJ's ranch, where he would have been surrounded by his security team and everything, and they said, look, we found this rifle, we can tie it to Alec Heidel, he's this pro-Castro agent, you need to invade Cuba now, we need to set up some offensive strikes. And if Kennedy had actually believed that he was shot at and attempted to assassinate him and kill him, that might have been the only way that they could change his mind about going into Cuba. And that after Oswald realized that Kennedy had actually been shot, then he goes into full-blown panic mode. Now, of course, there's always contingency plans. And I'm sure Oswald had one too, which I'm sure is why he was heading to the theater. That was probably a prearranged meeting place, often used by agents for dead drops and, clandestine meetings because it's dark. You know, nobody can really recognize who's in the movie theater. Often not crowded, but it's still a, quote, public place, quote, where both parties would probably feel comfortable. Now, does this mean Oswald was a spy? No. But let's go back. Back to his supposed defection. We know now through unclassified CIA documents that there was a program in place called Operation Redskin. And the aim of that project, secret CIA project, was to get false defectors into the USSR for an extended periods of time in order to observe the Russians' way of life, in order to observe their military movements, their the way their cities are laid out, how they operate. A lot of intelligence could have been gathered from someone who actually got to live there for, multiple weeks, months, years, and then get out. And they knew what they were doing because Oswald went to the embassy on the weekend to defect. And apparently you can't defect on the weekend, so his passport was just thrown in a desk drawer to be held on for later. And he convinced the Russians to let him stay. So it was basically an extended vacation. It was not really a defection in the proper sense of the term defection. And we can pretty much figure out that the Russians knew what we were doing. I don't think it was just a coincidence that Marina and Lee ended up meeting and marrying. I believe that Marina was some kind of a agent, a honeypot. Even at her young age, it is possible. Especially back then, the Russians didn't mess around. If they had access to, a child, they could definitely be trained for these purposes within a matter of months, years. Go see the movie, for example, Hannah, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And back then they were doing all kinds of stuff. But like I said, I don't rule out that Marina was stuck to Lee because she actually had approached two other defectors, United States defectors, American defectors. One, Robert Webster, and I'm not sure who the other one was. But she had tried to have a romantic relationship with Robert Webster, and it didn't actually work out, but her and Lee, it did. I don't think it was a coincidence. They met at the dance and married 6 weeks later, and they ended up having a kid together. Now, whether or not they really, really fall in love, or whether Marina's just really, really good at playing her part, who knows? But, we know from declassified documents that Lee Oswald was debriefed. I think he was debriefed in New York when he came back, and then again in Georgia, if I remember correctly. I might not be. Another indication of intelligence work of Lee Oswald is working at Jaggers Child Stovall. Now, this was in a company that dealt with a lot of the top secret map making for the CIA, using spy satellite reconnaissance photos and blowing them up for them, and really doing top secret work. And the fact that Lee was employed there is, to me, an indication of intelligence work. Now, I don't believe that Lee Oswald was a full-blown CIA employee. I think he was a used asset for those operations. And another indication that Lee Oswald was a quote-unquote, I think he fancied himself a spy. And I think he always had aspirations of being a spy. And he definitely knew some things about being a spy. Another indication of his intelligence connections is the Minox camera found in his possession. It is a super miniature spy camera. It was the smallest camera in the world at the time. There was undeveloped photos from Russia on it when it was found of buildings, Russian life, the city he was in, Minsk. And, a normal person wouldn't have had access to this Minox miniature spy camera, okay? Let's just clear that up right now. But Lee Oswald did, so what does that tell you? Another indication of Lee Oswald having intelligence ties is a little thing I like to call the package. And many people in the community don't even know about the package. This was a package. It was a big envelope made out of brown paper. And it was found in the dead letter bin at the Dallas post office a couple days after the assassination. Somebody recognized it. The name on the package was addressed to Lee Oswald. And, of course, they recognized that name as being the assassin of the president, supposedly. And there was something wrong with the package. It was addressed to Lee Oswald, but it had a false address on it. I can't remember the exact street number, but the name on it was West Natchez Street, Dallas, Texas. Now, a simple internet search will prove very quickly there is no such street in Dallas, and there never has been, and there never was. In fact, there's no street named that in the entire United States. The only one I found is in South Africa. So, excuse me. At least the way it was spelled on the package. Now, what's interesting is there was a street behind North Beckley, and it was called Natchez Street, N-A-C-H-E-S. And on the package, it was spelled N-A-S-S-O-U-S or something like that. Now, just from looking into this a little bit, the house, the address, I think it was 601 West Natchez Street. Now, 601 Natchez Street, N-A-C-H-E-S, the one behind North Beckley, was a rental property in 1963. It was what we call today a duplex, where half a house. And there was many of them on this street. But this one in particular can be traced back and seen today on Google Maps. And it's a duplex, a half a house. We know it was a rental property in 1963. We know who the owner was, but we don't know who the tenant was. Could this have been some kind of a safe house? Possibly. But more likely, this package was part of spycraft practiced by Lee Oswald. And what I mean by that is it's a very known thing in spycraft. Excuse me. that if you want to keep something safe for a couple days, if you want to get something off your person for a couple days, and in a place where nobody will look and nobody will suspect and nobody will be able to get but you with proper ID, if you knowingly place a package or a letter in the mail to an address that does not exist, that package or letter will end up in the dead letter bin at the post office, where it will remain for a couple weeks until things accumulate so much. This is for stuff that does not have return addresses or cannot be delivered for some reason. They will hold on to it for a while to see if anybody comes to claim it. And if they don't, then it's destroyed. But now, say for instance, if you were Lee Oswald and you had some pertinent information, or you had photos, or you had pictures, diagrams, or letter, something that you might have needed to keep safe, but you couldn't trust it to be at Ruth Payne's house, and you couldn't trust it to be at your rooming house, and you couldn't trust it to be on your person, and you have no friends, nobody you can trust, what are you going to do? And say you know that the president is going to be assassinated, or say you're aware of this thing, but just in case something might go wrong, you want to cover your ass, and so you put whatever it is you have inside of this package. You send it to yourself to a false address that cannot be delivered, that can be picked up, a couple of days or a week later from the dead letter bin, as long as you have your identification. He could pull out a selective service card and say, yes, I was wondering if you had, I was expecting a package. Didn't get it, but I'm wondering if some reason it didn't get delivered. Here's my name, Lee Oswald. Can you check and see if you have any packages for me? Oh, yes, sir. Here we go. We found it. It's addressed to this address. And then you play dumb and be like, I'm not sure. They might have got it wrong there, but that's me. Here's my ID, and you get your package back. It's a very clever way to protect information, and even if he couldn't get back to get it, and maybe somebody recognized his name on that package, and maybe that somebody opened it, and maybe that somebody realized what was in that package was very, very important, and got it to the right people, to have his name cleared. You follow what I'm saying here? But then let's go back to New Orleans for a little bit. It's not out of the realm of possibility that this former lifelong FBI man, current private investigator, plopped down in one of the most important cities at that time as far as Cuban activities, anti-Cuban activities, and mafia activities were going on in New Orleans. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility, for that person, Guy Bannister, to have also been reporting back to the CIA, as well as the FBI. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that he knew David Atlee Phillips, and that he was doing Mr. Phillips a favor. Of course, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility either if Oswald thought that he was being an informant for the FBI. Because we have indications of what he told Thomas Beckham in his HSCA testimony, that he was doing important work for the chief. And by the chief, he meant Hoover of the FBI. Now, we know at the time he was working out of Bannister's office, pretending to be pro-Castro, pro-Cuba, pro-communist, pretending to be. We know in reality he was not. Now, why would he be doing this? He would only be doing this to collect intelligence on pro-Castro and pro-Cuban entities and agents and report back to his superiors about it. And when arrested in New Orleans, he asked to speak to somebody from the FBI, and his wish is granted. And he talked to them for 2 or 3 hours. Now, we know it wasn't to get him out of jail, because that did not happen. Okay, he had to stay in jail until he went to his court hearing, and he had to pay his fine, which was paid by, I think, his cousin or uncle or something, part of the Marcello crime family. His big $10 fine was paid by them. We know that Hosty was hot on the Oswalds, trying to talk to Marina, and Lee Oswald, wondering what he's doing in Dallas or Fort Worth, and we know Oswald wrote him a note and took it down to the FBI office, and we still to this day don't know what that note said, because it was destroyed immediately after the assassination. Why would they do that if it wasn't some in some way inflammatory or derogatory or somehow contradicted the official picture of the assassin? Which brings us to, why did Oswald go to Mexico? He could have just as easily went to Washington, to the Mexican consulate, or the Cuban consulate here in America. Why go to Mexico? We have good indications that it wasn't even him at those embassies. We don't have him on tape. We don't have him on film. The descriptions of him differ from the way he appears in real life. And there's many, many other alter stories of what Oswald was doing in Mexico, if he even went to Mexico. We know David Alley Phillips was the station chief in Mexico for the CIA. Was it another meeting with him? Was he infiltrating a meeting of the assassination planning, as Harry Dean and Guy Gabaldon state in the Torbett document? Who knows? The fact that he was allegedly traveling down there with Albert Osborne, who allegedly ran an assassination school in Mexico, is interesting. Everybody likes to dismiss the Torbett document as fiction, but there's a lot of it that just doesn't sit well with me and is very, very intriguing and jives with some other aspects of the case that we do know to be true. We know what Wagner Carr, this district or attorney general for Texas, said after the assassination, that Oswald was an informant for the FBI, and as a matter of fact, here is his informant number, and he was being paid $200 a month for his information. So there's that. We also have a tip called into the FBI in Chicago from a man named Lee, warning of an assassination attempt on President Kennedy. And of course, we don't know that it was definitely Lee Oswald doing that, but it is interesting that out of all the names in the world, the name that called and warned them was Lee. And not to mention, he had a handgun for his protection. Now, normal, average, everyday people, don't normally have a handgun. I mean, a lot of people do for personal protection or whatnot, but if he was just a normal, average citizen doing what he was doing, he wouldn't have needed one. But he had one, and he went to get it after the assassination. And if you believe that Oswald took a cab home, then there's a story of him telling the cab driver to stop 6 blocks away from his rooming house, so he wouldn't just be rolling up and being let off at the front door, and then there's an ambush waiting for him. And if he had just shot the president, I seriously doubt he would have ran home to get his gun. He probably would have had it with him, as a backup weapon in case he had to shoot his way out of the school book depository, or at least die trying. But no, what does he do? He runs out, goes home, gets his gun, and goes to the movies. I mean, come on now. He was going there to meet someone. Things had gone wrong. He realized the implications of what had went wrong. He knew he better get his gun for protection from whoever he's going to meet there at that theater. Now, who it was, I don't know. More than likely Phillips, I'm guessing. Because shocker, the official list of patrons of the Texas Theater that day is missing. We know of George Applin that was in there, but that's it. We have no witness statements other than that to rely on about what exactly happened in the theater. Not to mention the Ruth and Michael Payne connection, who, if you believe in some way they were, Ruth Payne had a sister that worked for the CIA. They knew Allen Dulles in a roundabout way. Michael Payne's family comes from a long pedigree of these New England blue bloods. We know DeMoran Shield has CIA connections. There's another big gigantic red flag. We know DeMoran Shield was, he used his cover as an oil baron or geologist or whatever it was, but it allowed him to travel very frequently, leave the country frequently, and do what he needed to do undercover. He did spend a lot of time in Cuba. Just the connections are undeniable. Lee Oswald was not just Lee Oswald. He was being used as an asset by the CIA, by the FBI, or both. He likely infiltrated some kind of assassination ring. He probably knew what was going on. He might not have been aware of the exact plan, but he realized very quickly what was happening to him. When doing things like this, when guns are involved, and the president's involved, there's always a chance that something might go wrong. If things were truly, truly that bad between him and Marina, he wouldn't have stayed the night at the Payne's house. Ever. let alone slept in the same bed. And the fact that he left her pretty much all the money he had, supposedly, because they lived very meagerly. Yet, I'm sure if Oswald was collecting $200 from the FBI, and whatever he was getting from David Atlee Phillips or Maurice Bishop, and we know Maurice Bishop paid well, thanks to Antonio Veciana. That's why he was so loyal to him for all those years. Because Phillips was a very generous supporter of Alpha 66 and Veciana's Cuban activities. Veciana was a terrorist, a Cuban terrorist, a killer. And he was supported very handsomely by our government. So what exactly happened to all this money Lee Oswald had? And what did he do with it? Not sure. Because they apparently always fought about money, never wanted to buy anything. But he made sure his kids didn't go without. He made sure there was always food. He made sure he always gave Marina money for shoes or whatever the kids needed. But maybe he knew the gig was up. Maybe he was planning to leave her. Maybe he was planning to get out of Dallas. We don't know. I know they were trying to make plans early in '63 to get Marina back to Russia and out of the country from his letters that he wrote to the Russian consulate in D.C. And this went on for a couple months, and then the letters evolved into not just Marina, but also Oswald trying to go back to Russia, to be with his family in Russia. So who knows exactly what was going on. Now, another indication of intelligence was in New Orleans, with shop garage owner Adrian Alba, who was next to the Riley Coffee Company, where Lee Oswald spent a good deal of his time when he was supposed to be working, talking to Adrian, looking at the reading magazines and things there. But Mr. Alba ran the garage that housed, the FBI cars, the government cars. People would have to come in and sign them out, things like that. But he said that, he often saw an FBI car come up. Lee Oswald would go out and meet him, talk to him for a second, receive an envelope, which he would put in his shirt. And he said this happened more than once. So the connections to intelligence with Lee Oswald are undeniable. But to say he was a lone assassin is just idiotic. A lone nut. Like Doug says, this guy was never alone. Okay? He was always surrounded by family, surrounded by, look at his time in Russia. We have all these photos with him with his friends and hanging out at the factory and going on picnics and things like this. We know he used to hang out with his friends and play records and read Russian stuff, and the connections are undeniable. Undeniable that Lee Oswald had intelligence connections. Okay? And based on just that alone, even if by the slimmest chance Lee Oswald was up in that 6th floor window and he was shooting at Mannlicher Carcano at JFK and he shot him and killed him, it was still a conspiracy, because he was not alone. He was being manipulated and controlled from the time he stepped back on U.S. soil after his supposed defection to Russia. Now, Walt Brown goes into some interesting stuff about Gary Powers, the U-2 incident, and Oswald's time in Russia. And maybe what was supposed to happen. Very interesting. So go back and listen to that episode of Black Op Radio, November 27th. Check it out. So once again, thank you. Thank you for listening. Go check out all of our bloggers' work over on the 22november.wordpress.com. Everybody's killing it over there. Go check out the Dallas Action, my buddy Doug's podcast. Having some great guests on there. Garland's been doing a great job on there. Gail. And can't wait to hear Dusty tomorrow. And looking forward to it. But that is it for this one. This one is in the can. Shot up to the satellite. Beamed down directly to your ears. This is your boy, Rob Clark, thanking you for tuning in to The Lone Gunman. Welcome back.